Good evening. Hello, my name is Kimberly Mazik, and I'm the Associate Director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, where we work to bring principles of Catholic social thought to national and global conversations, building bridges across political and religious divisions, and encouraging young people to see their Catholic faith as central to their lives and work. I want to welcome you all here to Georgetown's School of Continuing Studies for the Latino Leader Gathering on Seeking the Common Good in the Election Year, Responses from U.S. Latinos. We've had a great response to this conversation with all of you here in this room with us, but also hundreds joining us online. The initiative has held over 175 gatherings since our founding 11 years ago. And we are so glad that we began streaming because we've been able to bring our dialogues around the principles of Catholic social thought to over 350,000 people nationally and internationally. As the United States faces a divisive presidential election in November 2024, just a short period of time from now, the idea that politics can help achieve the common good seems surprising. Politics too often appears to be a struggle about control rather than collaboration. In the United States, the history of Latino participation in politics emphasizes collective efforts and solidarity as central parts of political activity. This dialogue will explore the concept of the common good in our current political context, drawing especially from the experiences and lives of Latino leaders in the US politics and the US Catholic Church. Tonight, we brought four remarkable leaders together for this conversation. First, Leah Garcia, who is the Director of Hispanic Ministry in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and the former Vice President of the National Catholic Association of Diocesan Directors for Hispanic Ministry. Some of you may know that as NACADEM. Next, we have Alaya Herzog McCain. She's a reporter for Religious News Service, and she covers Latino faith and American Catholicism. She's previously reported at National Catholic Reporter and Sojourners. Santiago Ramos is the Executive Director of Wisdom of Crowds, a project of the Aspen Institute's Philosophy and Society Initiative, and a contributor to Commonweal and Plow magazines. And last but surely not least, we have here on our screen with us Father Agustino Torres. He's a priest with the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, based in Bronx, New York. He's the co-founder of Corazon Puro and Latinos por la Vida. Every year, Father Torres speaks to more than 25,000 youth and many more through television and other media. And then finally, moderating the conversation, we have my dear colleague, Christian Sunin, the project's manager of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. Please join me in welcoming this wonderful group.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone to the School of Continuing Studies here at Georgetown, and a special welcome to everybody who's joining us on the live stream. Tonight's conversation will center around the common good, what it is, how we pursue it, and what it means, especially during this election season. When we get to the Q&A period, we'll be taking questions from our in-person audience here at SCS. And for those of us joining on the live stream, please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag CommonGoodLatinosGU and by tagging at GUCST Public Life on X and Instagram. In today's polarized environment, the interests of the few are often privileged over the needs of the many. Inequalities are sustained by unequal access to ballots and influence, and cultural values often clash in destructive ways. In his letter Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis described the principle of the common good in the story of the Good Samaritan. We're familiar with the parable. After a man was attacked by thieves and was laying injured on the roadside, several people passed without giving him the time of day. Only one person stopped and cared for him, considering the wounded person deserving of his time and attention. Reflecting on this, Francis said that, quote, "A community can be rebuilt by men and women who identify with the vulnerability of others, who reject the creation of a society of exclusion and act instead as neighbors, lifting up and rehabilitating the fallen for the sake of the common good." And with this in mind, let's start our conversation. I'm going to go a question for all of you, and Aleja, I'll turn to you first before I go on to the others. How is the idea of the common good reflected in Latino culture and communities, and how can young Latino leaders lift up this idea in a divided time?
Well, thank you, Christian, for organizing this interesting conversation. I'm glad to be here, and we're here representing Religion News Service. One principle I take into my reporting on Latino faith is to really try to speak to specific Latino contexts, especially in cases where we don't have the data that reflects the whole diversity of Latinos more broadly. So here I'd like to speak to a specific context, and that would be the Latino Catholic Church. And I think a lot of us right now are thinking about the Synod, which for people who maybe haven't heard of it, right now in Rome, bishops, priests, lay people, religious are all meeting to talk about this concept of synodality, which essentially means listening, walking together, and discernment. And Latino theologians and theologians from Latin America will be very excited to tell you that this has long roots in Latin America and in the Latino Catholic Church. And one thing that comes to mind is that in the US since the 1970s, there's been this process called the Encuentro process that has used that consultation method to decide the pathway forward for Hispanic and Latino ministry in the US. And so I think that process at its heart, and synodality at its heart, really aims to underline the common part of common good. And I think another thing we can learn from synodality about the common good is that it can be really contentious to define what the common good is in the church and in the US political sphere. But one thing I hope we can all agree on is that there's some value in listening to people, particularly people who have lives that are very different from your own. It's one of my favorite things about journalism is the opportunity to listen. And so I would encourage people here to take opportunities to listen and think where you can do that more in your life.
Thanks, Aleja. Santiago, let's turn to you now, the same question. How is the idea of the common good reflected in Latino culture and communities, and how can young Latinos lift up this idea in a divided nation?
I think the answer I want to give might seem odd, maybe flippant at first, but I think Latino culture can contribute to the common good of the US by injecting more humor. There's different word, every Latin American country has a different word for joking around. Bromear, chotear, mofar, I think the Dominicans say it. And there's depth to that kind of being together when you're joking around about painful things, about superficial things, but also deep things. You're joking through your differences in a way. And there's a cultural utility to that kind of being together that there's philosophers have written about this. There's a great Cuban philosopher named Jorge Gracia who wrote about this. And just an example in my own life that I was thinking about, one of my best friends is also from Paraguay, where I was born. And our grandparents were on the opposite sides of the sort of Paraguayan civil war that became a dictatorship. His family was on the side of the dictatorship. And my family had people tortured and exiled. And how do we cope with it? We sort of, for the last 15 years, we've joked around a little bit about it. And I used to think this is irreverent, this is not serious, we need to be more serious and conscionable about the differences in the past. But now, the older I get, I see the wisdom of that for society as a whole, a sort of tearing together. So that's what I thought I would submit to that question.
Thanks, Santiago. Lia, same question to you. How is the idea of the common good reflected in Latino culture and communities, and how can young Latino leaders lift up this idea in a divided time?
We need to compare war wounds, because I grew up in the Civil War in El Salvador in the 80s. So I think, what Santiago just said about, how do you cope with something like that? You just do the best as you can. But to answer your question, and thank you for the invite to be here with all of you. I can share about the beauty of the Hispanic community. We are big on family values. We throw big parties, we eat a lot of food. Everybody's invited to our gatherings. So, our faith teaches us that we are built to be in communion, in relationship with God, in relationship with one another. And I think what we can draw from, young people, young Latinos, my eldest is in college right now. She calls me home and she says, I want to make arroz con pollo for my friends, for my roommates, teach me how. So we always want to be welcoming. We always want to be very attentive to the needs of one another. And so we have to, I think, the beauty of our culture is that we can draw from our own experiences growing up with big families, big celebrations, and also with our faith that draws us to relationship with one another. And I think that's where we can draw that's where we can sense how the common good is not only something that comes from God, but it comes from our culture as well.
Well, and community, of course, is important. And Father Agustino, we especially thank you for being here with us, because I know you have your community needs you up in New York, so we're glad you can join us here virtually. But the same question to you: how is the idea of the common good reflected in Latino culture, and how can young Latino leaders lift up this idea in a divided time?
Yeah, no surprise. Thank you for having me. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. No surprise that I'm going to build off of some things that were already said. And I think the beauty that we bring, we desire to make things beautiful. I mean, just like, something as simple as the decorations, that you would go in and see at a Mexican restaurant, the hour and the hours and the love and the attention that requires to make a sarape, like these are things that we might take for granted, but like there's an intentionality in making something beautiful. And I think that this is something that we bring everywhere. Thanks be to God. Everywhere we go, we try to make it beautiful. And this is something that is so needed to beautify, because sometimes our hearts are so wounded, right, by the dehumanization that's going on in society, that sometimes only beauty can pierce, can cut through that clutter. And the other thing I would say is that we've suffered. And please understand me correctly when I say suffering is almost like a precondition to empathy, to understanding the needs of the other. So if a necessary element in the common good is understanding the need of the other, like we've been wounded, and this can be transformed into entering into the pain, the experience of another. And I think this is something that we can bring to the common good.
Thanks, Father Agustino. Aleja, I want to turn back to you now and talk a little bit more about our current political context. To set the stage for us, really, and you do an outstanding job of covering Latino communities and voters for Religion News Service. So we know that in this election, there will be about 32.6 million Latinos eligible to vote next month. That's about 4 million more than there were in 2020. What impact is that likely to have on the election and on its outcome?
Well, I think Latinos could potentially have a huge impact this election. They make up the largest share, or the largest share ever before, of the eligible voters in the U.S. And of new voters who are eligible since 2020, half of them are Latino. So it could be a big impact. But I think what maybe draws back from that impact is Latinos have historically turned out at lower rates than other racial and ethnic communities. So I think that's going to be a big question that I'll be watching, is what does turnout look like this year, because that's going to have a big impact. In terms of preferences, Latinos are showing a preference for Kamala Harris this time around, but she's polling at either the same rate as Joe Biden in 2020 or slightly less, trailing him. And so I've seen several polls that have Donald Trump polling around 40%. And so I think it is important to note, though, that Kamala Harris is doing better with Latinos than Joe Biden did this time around when he was still in the race, and when RFK Jr. was getting pretty substantial Latino support when he was also in the race.
So with that, what are some of the issues and values that seem most important for Latino voters? What are some of the differences among Latinos by age, religion, nationality? And how has this shifted from 2020 and the presidential election then?
Well, I think one thing that stood out to me that I've seen change since 2020 is that Latinos who intend to vote for Trump are more enthusiastic than they were in 2020. So you have 70% of Latino voters who intend to vote for Trump telling Pew that they're voting for Trump as opposed to against Kamala Harris. And for Kamala Harris, or Latinos who intend to support her, that's under half of voters saying that they're supporting her specifically instead of against Trump. So I think that's really notable. In terms of what issues Latinos say are important, the standout issue is the economy, and especially inflation. That just dwarfs everything else. Some other issues that come in as important kind of on a secondary level are immigration, healthcare, gun policy, violent crime, and Supreme Court appointments. So those are all important. The thing you'll notice that I didn't talk about actually was abortion, and that does come in, but on one particular poll, it stood out to me from the 19th News that asked Latino voters to say what their top issue was. And despite our Catholic bishops teaching that Catholic voters should take abortion as their preeminent priority in approaching this election. Only 5% of Latino Catholics said abortion was their top issue this election. And we also know from other polls that about 2/3 of Latino Catholics believe abortion should be legal in most or all cases. So we don't even know if that 5% subscribe to church teaching. You can tell that I'm excited to talk about religion and Latinos, and that's mostly what I'll talk about. In terms of the differences, I will say that younger Latino voters are showing more support for Kamala Harris than older Latino voters. But in terms of religion, different polls kind of break it down differently. But one poll from Pew has about 2/3 of Hispanic Protestants, that's mainline and evangelical as well, supporting Donald Trump. 2/3 of Latino Catholics supporting Kamala Harris, and another 2/3 of religiously unaffiliated Latinos supporting Kamala Harris as well. So there's some variation in polls there. I think abortion is a place where you can kind of see the differences between Latino religious groups. From the 19th News poll, and that's one that's really dug into abortion and also thankfully given us some data on Latino unaffiliated or religiously unaffiliated voters. We have 9 in 10 Latinos who are religiously unaffiliated saying abortion should be legal in all or most cases. About 7 in 10 on that poll of Latino Catholics saying abortion should be legal in all or most cases. And then 4 in 10 Latino Protestants saying abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So you see differences there. I think when we hear statistics, it can be kind of tempting to draw a simple relationship between a Latino or a person's faith and their politics, but that just doesn't bear out when I'm talking to people. People are complicated, surprisingly. Recently, I spoke with a Latina evangelical whose church teaches that abortion is immoral, and that's something she believes in her daily life. It's something she's kind of practiced in her personal life. But she's actually an abortion rights organizer because she grew up in the Dominican Republic where abortion was illegal. And she believes that that had negative health impacts. So she's organizing around Florida's Amendment 4. So things are complicated, and it's fun being a religion reporter.
Certainly complicated. You mentioned unaffiliated or religiously unaffiliated voters a little bit, and we know that through polling that young Latinos especially are becoming increasingly unaffiliated with organized religion. You talked a little bit about how that might impact views on abortion. What about other issues? What impact does this religious unaffiliation have on political attitudes more generally? What can we know? What can't we know?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about religiously unaffiliated Latinos because I feel like we don't talk about them enough. There are some differences in methodology across different polls on how to count them, so we don't have agreement, but Pew has tracked the largest increase in religious disaffiliation. Back in 2010, they had that 1 in 10 Latinos were religiously unaffiliated, and that tripled by 2022. So that's a big deal. And in that same 2022 poll, they had slightly under half of 18 to 29-year-old Latinos being religiously unaffiliated. So it's a big deal. We know, as I said earlier, that they are intending to support Kamala Harris mostly and about their views on abortion. Another thing we know from religiously unaffiliated people in general is that they tend to turn out to vote less than religious people. And I think that could be a reason that we know maybe a little less about religiously unaffiliated Latinos. We're not seeing them come up in political journalism. We're not hearing about them even though they're going to be a force this election. And I think the other kind of struggle we have in learning about them is a lot of polls lump all religiously unaffiliated people together in one bucket and don't separate them out by race and ethnicity the way they do for Christians. So I've done some reporting about their spiritual beliefs that has been really interesting, but I look forward to people really diving into their politics more.
Thanks, Aleja. Santiago, let's turn to you now and talk a little bit about the principles that we're here to talk about and the dynamics that are at stake in our politics. You recently wrote a piece in Plow that reflected on Paraguay's authoritarian history that you just mentioned. And you wrote that authoritarian parties, quote, are in charge of the state, not of the destiny of the nation as a whole, which appears to be carried by a strange current that's expressed in literature and art. In Catholicism, we have our own strange current, namely reverence for human dignity and a priority for the most vulnerable among us. It's a tradition that's rooted in the Gospels, and it's been carried through the centuries and expressed through art and literature. So my question is, how might Catholics bring these commitments to U.S. politics, and specifically in situations where state policies directly contradict this central principle of dignity, through the death penalty, for example, or in violent migration enforcement practices? How can that cultural current begin to change the state?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm trying to think as a Latino Catholic. So what does the Latino element add to Catholicism? I guess is sort of a question I asked myself before I thought about the answer to your question. And I think there was an old professor of Georgetown, Mario Vargas Llosa, who said, "I didn't know that I was Latin American until I moved to Europe." So it's like when you see like the contrast between the world around you and the culture that you take to the place, that's when you find out what your identity is. And Latin culture, Hispanic culture, whatever you want to call it, is extremely difficult to define because it involves, I don't know how many countries, it involves at least 2 languages, it involves maybe 2 continents if you include Spain and Portugal. It involves different religions. So what is it? And I think in a weird way, Latinos in the United States have a unique position to try to define it because we're all sort of out of our element in a way. Maybe not if you're in Texas or Puerto Rico, but the rest, I lived in Boston, New York, Kansas. So we could sort of reflect on what it means and what it is that we can bring to this country. And like the humor thing was not a joke, that was serious. And the other thing I think about in terms of this is, let me know if you observe this as well. If you go, when I moved to America, I noticed that when you go to church, everyone goes to communion in the Catholic Church. Yeah. And if you go south of the border, anywhere, half the people don't go to communion. If you go to your Spanish Mass at your local parish, right, half the people don't go. And I was always scandalized as a teenager. I was like, don't the Americans know the rules? That you can't just go up there if you are under a state of mortal sin. And I talked to a friend of mine once, not too long ago, and he's like, of course they know the rules. Americans always know the rules. That's the one thing they know. They might not follow the rules, but they know the rules. And it's still a mystery to me what it is about our culture that we sit down. And I don't know if it's interiority or excessive self-reflection. Maybe it's just, you don't need to justify yourself. If you're a sinner, you're a sinner, and you just stay put that week. But there's still a sense that, I don't know, there's still a sense that you're still part of the church and you're still loved by God. But you're fine. You're just not perfect. I don't know, that sort of like non-moral or non-moralistic sense of religiosity, I think is something that we could bring to the common good for the U.S.
I didn't realize Mario Vargas Llosa was at Georgetown.
I think he was here a few years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm even more proud to be here now.
There you go.
It was something he wrote about a lot. He's got a couple of essays in conversation with Camus about ideology and the dangers of ideology for politics. And it's something that you talk about a lot too. And it's something that Pope Francis cares about a lot as well. In an interview last year, Pope Francis said, when culture is distilled and turned into ideology, it's poison. Two questions for you. First, what are the dangers of politics turning ideological? And then second, what are the ideological forces that our church and nation should be wary of today? And more importantly, how do they undermine the common good?
Well, I think just broadly speaking, the problem with ideology is that it's a sort of narrative of reality that excludes a lot of important parts of reality. It doesn't let you see certain things because it's fixated on a particular picture of reality. So just by being here, just by knowing our history, Hispanics sort of challenge a certain, nationalist, right-wing, whatever you want to call it, idea of America, because there were Hispanics in North America before the first Thanksgiving, right? The border of the South, it hasn't always been there. In fact, it hasn't been the way it is now for that long. Puerto Rico is still part of the United States, as far as I know, right? They don't have electoral college votes, but it's still part of our country. So just that. And I think it challenges progressivism in a particular way because Hispanics still don't become good sort of liberal subjects. There's still a community aspect to our existence, sort of family-oriented, dare I call it socially conservative aspect to our existence that doesn't always mesh with mainstream liberal institutions. I think also ideology doesn't want us to see the particular ways that we treat migrants. You have to treat it like a policy issue. The one time I did do a little bit of reporting, I mean, not compared to a real reporter, but when I interviewed this person that went through the whole gamut of detention facilities in the border, I was like, the only task I should do here is just write in detail what she went through. Because that's the only thing that I could really give, right? Just the facts. And that's what ideology doesn't let you see. So there's all sorts of ways that we sort of pop up in American politics and force people to see things that they don't want to see.
Leah, I want to turn to you now and talk a little bit about bring the element of the life of our faith into this. You lead Hispanic ministry at the Archdiocese of Baltimore, and you're a leader in Hispanic ministry nationwide as well. And you work to integrate the teachings on human dignity and the common good into Catholic formation, both on a diocesan and on a national level. How can these principles shape and be reflected in worship in these communities as they're found in Baltimore and in our country, and how are they missing?
So, I often hear how Latinos are not involved in advocacy and how Latinos are unaware of Catholic social teaching. And that's not what I see with the communities that I serve. This became very clear during the pandemic when my office was getting, I was the office that was getting very different phone calls. My office was getting phone calls regarding we're alone, we don't have anybody with us to bring us food, someone's sick, someone's dying, and the community just rallied together. The parishes where there is Hispanic ministry, they just rallied together and provided accompaniment and service. Someone dies in the community, you bet they're gonna be selling tamales and tacos and pupusas, and they're gonna raise the money that is needed to take care. We just take care of each other. We take care of our own. We may not be able to, the regular, especially immigrant, the immigrant community or first generations, we may not be able to tell you all of the different aspects and steps and the basics of Catholic social teaching. We may not be able to elaborate that, but we live it. We practice it every day. And I see that in the communities that I serve in Baltimore. I lived in the Northern Virginia area, worked in the Archdiocese of Washington as well. And so I see how Catholic social teaching and the common good is lived and practiced every day in our communities, and it just amazes me. Aleja mentioned the process of the Quinto Encuentro. We now have a fruit of the Quinto Encuentro, which is the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministry. And in that plan, it explains and it allows us to really tap into what are the priority areas for Hispanic Latino ministry here in the United States. And one is Catholic social teaching. So, and there's wonderful things that are happening nationwide and locally. Wonderful initiatives like Pastoral Migratoria, which is an immigrant-led ministry that was born out of Chicago and now has spread to other dioceses. Even in Baltimore, we did a training during the pandemic because we want to empower our own Latino community to be advocates for themselves and to also to better accompany the immigrant and the undocumented community. There are many resources that are available now. Yes, more needs to be done, but what I see, what I live, the people that I've served, the formation that we provide in our communities, it's not far off from what the gospel asks us to do, to be good Samaritans. I see that exercise in almost every parish that I visit. In Baltimore, we have small faith communities, comunidades eclesiales de base, people that have, Father Agustino said, it's like, we've gone through this hurt, through this pain, we've migrated. Some have had some really difficult stories reaching North America. And I think that makes us resilient people. So when we see someone in our community hurting, we step up to the plate. And so I think there's vast opportunities for us to see how the Hispanic community fights and works towards the common good. There are some really great resources available now, thanks be to God. that are, people that are in organizations that are reaching out to the Hispanic Latino community, like Catholic Relief Services. They actually have a department that just focuses on the formation of Hispanic Latino Catholics and advocacy efforts like Bread for the World as well. So yes, more needs to be done, but I think that we're headed in the right direction. So that's all I can say.
Well, in other words, Latinos are not good liberal subjects, says Santiago. So now let's talk a little bit about the things that good liberal subjects do, like vote and participate in politics. What should we do in our local communities of faith so that the church's social teaching might have a broader impact beyond them, especially in public policy and other forms of public engagement? What are our opportunities and responsibilities, especially during this election season?
We have to continue accompanying people, especially young people. Something that I have witnessed, and it's been on media and people have reported on it, is how our children, my children born here in the United States, like many of you, whose parents are older, they have a different mentality. They might vote differently from you, and so sometimes that they crash, they clash when it comes to the candidate that they're going to vote for. But ultimately, they recognize that they're family and they have to be there for one another. Circling back to the National Plan for Hispanic Latino Ministry, that is a great opportunity for us to really tap into the resource so that we can better inform our community. Because for the longest time, there were only two noticieros. It was Univision and Telemundo, and that was our community, how our community was informed. Social media has challenged that tremendously, and so I believe people are better informed now. They have more information about where our candidates stand on different issues, and I believe that's the reason why so many Catholics, Hispanic Catholics, are you can't really pinpoint if traditionally they voted a certain way, but now with the information that is out there, it's a different playing field. There are several efforts that are being done nationwide, and I want to give a shout out to my husband because who's here and who works at the USCCB. They just launched maybe 2 years ago, the Catholic Social Teaching Certificate for Hispanic Latino Leaders, which is a train-the-trainer certificate program, and it aims to educate and to form leaders like myself to be able to train and form our leaders in parishes and in our own communities. So if those I think are the benefits and the good things that are happening that before 10, 15 years ago that was not readily available to us. So there are good resources available. There's still that tendency in some of our pastors that that type of teaching doesn't belong in the church. So we still have to fight and battle with that and try to find a common ground to some of the clergy that we have here in the United States serving Hispanic Catholics. They come from Latin America, so they come they've been raised differently, they've been taught differently, they went to seminary, and so it's a different culture for them as well. It's a culture clash, and so I think one of my roles as director of Hispanic ministry is to be able to provide an integral formation for our Hispanic Latino community, not just on catechesis and doctrine and dogmas, but also on Catholic social teaching, on so many issues that affect our community.
Father Agustino, I want to turn now to you and talk about a particular principle that kind of made waves throughout Latin America, and Latin America kind of put it on the global scene in a very important way, and that's the priority for the poor and vulnerable. You're a Franciscan friar of the Renewal, and it's an order known for its attention to the poor and vulnerable. And the Gospels are unequivocal about our duty to attend primarily to the vulnerable among us and to make the poor a central focus of our social and political efforts. How does the priority for the poor fit into the Catholic vision of the common good?
That's a tremendous question, but I think that there's a need to kind of distinguish a little bit about when we say Catholic vision. my mind asks, what do we exactly understand when we say Catholic vision? Is it like the Catholic vision, like in practice or in teaching? In teaching, it's there. It's so beautifully expressed, not just in the catechism. If anybody wants to go into deeper reading, Centesimus Annus is a great synthesis of Catholic social teaching. The compendium for Catholic social teaching is just a treasure trove of teaching. It's there. That's the Catholic vision. But the Catholic implementation of that vision is well, I'll just tell you my experience. We're there in our neighborhoods, and the people literally need food, and that is a reality. And not everybody has access to some of the infrastructure that's there provided. And something that we try to teach everyone, and even with respectfully, call people on. It's like we have an obligation to our brothers and sisters. I got invited to teach, to give a preaching at a pretty well-to-do suburban area, not too far, about 30 minutes from our friary in a ghetto in New Jersey. And I said, yeah, we're talking about the gospel, but I just asked them, I said, but we're obligated. They're our brothers and sisters, and what are we doing for them? And I'm sure there's a lot of people doing great things for them, but I've never been invited back to that place. So I don't know, sometimes you push the envelope a little bit, but this is reality. I'm responsible for you, and you're responsible for me. If I see someone just falling down on the sidewalk, I'm obligated because of my baptism. And this is a good thing. And this is something like you said in the question is unequivocal. This is a gospel. You can't get around this. You can't read the words of Jesus Christ and skip over his call for us to engage the poor radically. And it's something that each one of us has to answer. Now, I've chosen a vocation that kind of sets it up for me. And this is what we are very intentional about doing. But I also have an obligation to teach others around me. And I'm trying to do that, especially Latino youth who have this fire. When we teach this, they're just like, yes. And it unites kind of their worlds, family, faith, outreach. And I'm witness to a beautiful transformation in the hearts of our young people. But the Catholic vision of the common good, we need to get more to the gospel vision of that. The teaching is clear, but our implementation, respectfully, needs to grow.
So what are some of the challenges that the church faces in sharing and acting on this message? What is it that gets in our way and leads us to ignore the poor and the vulnerable in our society? And more importantly, how can we correct this?
Well, I think that we need to identify something that's a reality, and we sometimes become more Catholic. Sometimes we're more American Catholics than Catholic Americans, and we allow our politics to inform our faith more than our faith allowing it to inform our politics, and we read more from the gospel of our news providers than the gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this is something that we have to keep ourselves in check with. And I know wonderful people, very devoted people who hold beliefs that are contrary to the gospel. And sometimes they're not even aware of this. And this is across the line, and so we need to be aware that this is not something that's based just on race or class or gender. This is something that's a call to every single human being. And we have to, I'm definitely a student of John Paul II. He called it a dialogue that leads to solidarity, and Fratelli Tutti, which you mentioned. By the way, I think Fratelli Tutti is it's a bomb waiting to go off. It needs to be read. It needs to be studied. It needs to be understood, because it's groundbreaking. It's amazing. And I think that maybe in a couple decades, it's probably going to have more of an impact than it will right now. But Pope Francis says that it's a accompaniment that leads to fraternity. But it's the same concept. I need to engage you so that we will have communion wherever you're from, whatever, color, creed, whatever it is. I need to be engaging. And this is the gospel. Jesus calls us specifically to the poor. I was on the border in McAllen, Texas, a couple of weeks ago. And honestly, like, I'm just engaging in these people who have literally nothing. And there's something so beautiful about this encounter. And it's obviously there's some material needs, but the spiritual reality is much greater. I want everyone to experience this. Last time I checked, Jesus wanted this too, you know? And so how can we as a church do more of this is, I think, part of the solution.
Especially now in the campaigns, we've seen the Democratic Party slide towards more restrictive immigration policies. Biden just last week released extremely restrictive asylum rules. We see among both parties, especially just a very absent focus on poverty and issues of poverty and caring for the most vulnerable among us. I'm wondering, Aleja, maybe I'll come to you. How are the campaigns engaging with these kinds of ideas that we've just heard from Father Agustino? How is it affecting voters? Are they attentive to these things? How does the presence of these ideas and their importance for the faith factor into the way that campaigns focus their efforts when dealing with Latino or other voters?
Yeah, that's a great question with lots of parts, so I'll see what I can get to. I think one incident that's been in my mind recently is J.D. Vance, who's the vice presidential candidate running with Trump. He's the only Catholic in the race. Was at an event recently and said was asked to provide a theological defense, essentially, of his immigration policy. And he said that a Christian theology is that you're supposed to take care of your family first. And I thought that was really interesting because we're not getting a lot of theological defenses of policy generally, especially, I guess, from the Harris campaign. They're certainly kind of engaging faith voters. They have faith outreach going on there, but generally from like a stage, you're not seeing Kamala Harris or Tim Walz cite their theology. So I think that is kind of an interesting difference. It's true that Harris is kind of following in Biden's footsteps with the kind of asylum policies she's talking about continuing, pretty committed to most restrictive asylum policies we've seen from kind of Democratic candidates for a long time. I do think Kamala Harris talks a lot about the care economy, and that could kind of fall into some of the issues people are talking about, has talked a lot about caregivers. And I think all the candidates would argue, right? They're going to make their theological case if you press them on it, that they're pushing for the common good. And I think it's up to voters to decide whether each candidate's vision for the common good sounds appropriate or not. I hope I got some of the pieces.
I'm interested, Santiago. What do you make of this family first theology? How do you see that fitting into kind of our Catholic ideas, or anybody really? Leah, Father Agustino, what do you make of this?
I mean, I think it's a dodge. I guess my question would be, who does he think is in his family?
Mm-hmm. And I'll clarify. So he then went, and he said, okay, that extends to the nation. That means America first, was kind of how he then ties it into immigration policy.
Anybody else? Father Agustino, and maybe...
Yep, I could just, respond by saying, a man went down to Jericho, and there he was assaulted by robbers. And who was his neighbor? Yeah, I mean, I think that's the Good Samaritan is a very eloquent response to that position, the family first.
Of course, a parable that came up at the very beginning of our conversation and that keeps coming up. And so clearly one that informs our vision of the common good. Leah, maybe I'll come back to you. We've talked a lot about Latin American spirituality and the things that it brings to this conversation. In your work, you work a lot with recent immigrants. You work also a lot with children of immigrants. How do you see elements of Latin American spirituality or Latin American Catholicisms working through the Catholic communities here in the United States? How do they continue throughout generations? What stays the same? What changes? And what does that mean for their vision of the common good?
A lot of us come from the land of martyrs. Monsignor Romero. I'm a child born in 1978. It was the year he was assassinated, and my family left early 90s. Because there was no end to the Civil War when we decided to migrate to the United States. So a lot of us come here with the background of having seen, witnessed, heard, know people that have been massacred in civil wars. Monsignor Romero was assassinated because he defended the poor, the lonely, the most vulnerable in our communities. We talked about earlier about how, we come from this experience of pain and injustice in Latin America, and you can see that very vividly in our culture. When we do the Via Crucis during the Lenten season, some of the ways that we portray that pain and we accompany our Lord in his pain on the way to the cross, we also put ourselves in that cross. We think about our brothers and sisters who have died trying to cross the border. The thousands of people whose names we will never know. The millions of people who have undergone so much pain. Women who have been gone through so many atrocities trying to reach the better land. So we bring with us all of that pain, but as Father Agustino said, we also transform that pain, and that is very vividly displayed in our in the way we live our faith here in the United States. We come from Teología de la Liberación. We are very much aware of what the Church Fathers, the theologians like Gutierrez and La Teología del Pueblo. If you see Pope Francis, he was taught by the very same people who fought for a better world and who pinpointed the injustices that were happening in Latin America and continue to happen in Latin America. And so we have all of this vast cultural, theological background and also painful stories that we can utilize and transform. In some of our dioceses, for example, the Archdiocese here of Washington, St. Camilla's Parish, and in Baltimore, we have small faith communities. A lot of these people lived in Latin America advocating against the mining companies and against the privatization of water. And so we utilize what we know in order for us to be able to transform our realities. There's many dioceses that do el Via Crucis del Migrante. We go out into the streets. That's how we display our pain, but also that's how we display our journey, our journey of faith as well.
I want to make sure we get to questions from the audience. So maybe if any of you have any questions, we'll open it up to all of you now to ask whatever you'd like. We have microphones on the side. Kira and Kim will come to you. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll call on you, and then we'll bring you the mic. Yes, right here, Kira.
Thank you. It's on. Okay, good. Joe Jordan with the USCCB. I wanted to talk about and ask a question about the importance of the public witness of Hispanic Latino Catholics, especially within the context of the run-up to and the aftermath of the election. Because I was just talking to some of our bishops last week about the importance of their public witness and personal stories in catechizing the faithful in the social mission of the church. But I also think it's important to hear from Hispanic Latino Catholics about their personal stories and their witness, because we have this gift of our Catholicity. We have this gift of our universality, where when we go to our parishes and we engage in our communities, everyone there is from different walks of life, different political beliefs, and that witness in those contexts are so important. So how might Hispanic Latino Catholics and those who accompany and walk with Hispanic Latinos be able to lift up their voices to reach and kind of breach the divide that we're seeing, especially as I'm sure it will be inflamed in the coming months or so. So perhaps you might have examples of the power of that witness, or something to the extent of that question.
Maybe that's a good one for the two people here who are deeply involved in ministry, Father Agustino and Lia. So maybe Father Agustino, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I ventured into this when we founded Latinos por la Vida, seeing that there was a tremendous need for some organization of the Latino voice, especially in the pro-life movement, which in the Catholic Church is very strong. But it's curious that there wasn't really a lot of openings for the Hispanic voice there. So we decided to create it, and some of our approaches to things, people were very open and waiting for something to be organized, but it was also very difficult. And so I think that if there's a view towards, if Pope Francis uses the words primeriar, to take the first step, I think that the reality is that the Latino vote, quote unquote, as we heard from some of the statistics, we, as me speaking as a priest, as a representative of the Catholic Church, we got work to do. And there's a huge need to engage the Latinos that are here right now, that were born here, that, are searching, as we heard that there's a growing amount of disaffiliation happening. And so I guess the question is how are we engaging that? Yes, there's a pastoral plan, but the question that was brought up is how are we implementing that plan? And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where it's not just saying every 4 years, where the Latinos? I thought the Latinos were Catholic. It's every day, living this reality every day. Because in reality, respectfully, my experience is that there's two churches in the United States. There's the established church and there's the Latino church, and they're kind of like two different worlds. And that's not right. That's not right. And we need to work on bridging that gap, both of us. But to recognize that this isn't just something that we show up October every 4 years and say hey, make sure that you guys vote a certain way. It's got to be more than that.
I think what I can contribute to that question is we have to be able to empower our leadership. We have leaders in our parishes. They may not think they are leaders, but they are. I work with wonderful individuals who also engage not just in Catholic advocacy or in Catholic social ministry. We have a lot of volunteers that are members of the TPS Alliance. Here in the DMV area, we have a huge community of Salvadorians and others who are Tepecianos, and they march every year and they advocate and then they try to engage other Latinos to participate. There's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done. One of the things that I believe could be very helpful is empowering our leaders to speak up, but also to change the narrative of who a Latino is and what do we contribute. When I get invited to things like this, to speak in public arenas, when I go to a different diocese and I get invited to talk about catechesis, every single time they read my bio, I get embarrassed, but, has a master's degree, is getting her DMin. I say this because to me, I feel a great responsibility. And I always get Latina women, young women who come to me and say, I want to be able to do what you do. How did you do it? How did you accomplish it? How did your parents allow you to go to school? Because my parents are telling me that I need to get married and have kids, but I want to do something else with my life. And so, empowering our youth, I have such a tremendous faith in you all and how we can change the narratives. I see it in my daughter too, who's in college, and I see the faith that I have tried to instill in her and the values that I have tried to pass on to her, family values, moral values, our Catholic faith. How does she live that out in the community where she's at right now? She's hours away from home. And, I can only hope and pray and ask the Lord, did I do a good job raising this child, raising my son? But we have to change the narrative of what a Latino does. What does a Latino look like? What are we capable of doing? And I think all of you here are a perfect example of the amazing testimonies that each of us brings and what we can do for the common good.
Let's get maybe one or two more questions from the audience. Yeah, here in the front.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks to God. My name is Kerm Garcia, and I work for the DC public school system, focusing on our multilingual students, many of them being Hispanic. When I moved to the DMV area, I've noticed these little kids born in 2008, and I was like, how could they be so little? And I know now that I'm growing up, my parents would say the same thing to me when I was their age. What do you see that's different in this new Latino community, this new age bracket? What's something different that hasn't been seen in years prior?
Maybe we go, well, Leah, maybe just building on what you just said, and then I wonder also, and then I wonder also afterwards if there's anything that if we relate it back to the electorate. So,
I can tell you from my own experience as a mother, my kids have grown in such a privileged world. And I say privileged because of the culture that they have encountered. My daughter, my son, they've grown up with Ethiopian friends and Latina friends and Anglo friends. And to them, culture, it's not a barrier. It's, they have created and they've grown up in this multilingual, multicultural environment that I could no longer see the color of your skin or the accent that your mother speaks, because my mother has an accent too. So I think when you grow up in such an environment that you are able to overcome, because we were saying the culture of encounter. When I'm able to see past your family history and where you come from and why you landed here, I just see you as my friend. I see that through my children. I used to host pijamadas with all of these girls, and they would bring different plates to our, to our home, delicious foods from various parts of the world. So I think, every generation says, right, it was when I was growing up, it was different. But it is so much different. But also, you have to add to that social media. Social media has been a big influence in how people, I'm not a native to social media. I dread when I have to change my phone, because that means I have to, learn a new method of, the iPhone. But I also think that also has been a huge influence in the way people interact with one another and how they communicate with one another.
And then quickly, Aleja, maybe if there's something you can say about generational differences and what that means for voting behavior, for religiosity.
Sure. So I think I said a few things earlier, and so I don't know whether I'll dive into the stats too much again. We talked about the high rates of religious disaffiliation. But this question actually made me think about, I was just reviewing my interview notes from a really wonderful interview I did with Nabil Tueme, who studies Latino youth at Springtide. And she had a lot of great insights, about kind of what's necessary for ministry. And I think one of them connects to a point that was made earlier. And she said that for Latino youth, it's really important to them to see where the rubber meets the road with their faith, how it's lived out, and particularly that kind of getting involved with community service can be a huge thing for Latino youth to feel like their faith means something and is meaningful in their lives. I think the language question also came up, and I can only remember the general statistics right now, unfortunately, but for US Latinos, about a third are Spanish dominant, about a third are kind of bilingual, and then another third are English dominant. And that's like a challenge I hear from ministry leaders, and also something Nabil talked about was how to minister to youth who are now increasingly more English dominant, right? But still in a way that acknowledges their Latinidad, that makes them feel seen for the, race and ethnicity. And I think those were all, interesting themes, and I'm sure there'd be more about that interview that I'd love to talk about, but that's a few highlights.
Well, as we come to the end of our time here, I want to close with a question like we started. Same question to all of you, just a quick 1-minute answer. After the election, regardless of the results, what can young Latino Catholics do to continue to work towards the common good in a divided nation? And maybe we'll start, Lia, with you.
Hay que seguir andando. We just have to keep going regardless of what the results are, because the elections don't end after this November. I think it is so important to continue to advocate and to local advocacy, our who's going to be our judge, who vote for, your state attorney. We can't just focus on the presidential elections. We have to go deeper. So lots needs to be done. A lot of formation, a lot of education. Again, I truly believe in the young Hispanic Latino power, the power that you have to change and transform our communities. We as Latinos, we come from a very machista, sexista background. We need to get on with our lives. We have to leave those things behind. So I truly believe that there's lots more that can be done, and the power rests in us.
Santiago, maybe we'll go to you next. After this election, regardless of the result, what can young Latino Catholics do to continue to work towards the common good?
So I guess the good Hispanic answer would be to pray to the Virgin Mary.
That's right.
That's my answer. No, I say what is a Latino? Like the question over there about Latino witness. What are we witnessing to? We're witnessing to a particular cultural experience, a particular way of life, a particular way of being Catholic. And if things get bad, whoever wins, there's going to be a lot of strife, maybe more, maybe less. International situation also doesn't look too good. So, you have to buckle up. But I think within the Hispanic tradition, there's already a lot of resources that you can look towards that will be useful in this time, I think.
Buckle up and pray to la Virgen. Aleja, we'll turn to you next. After the election, what can young Latinos do to work towards the common good?
Yeah, I think I'll just put in another plea for listening, and I think also staying engaged. There's a lot of kind of like hopelessness and frustration around our political situation, but continuing to stay engaged with your community and what's going on, and then taking the time to discern what your gifts are best leading you to do. Right, every single person's going to have a different answer there, but those are some of my thoughts.
Father Agustino, over to you. After the election, what's one thing young Latinos can do to work towards the common good?
Roll up your sleeves and go out into the streets and engage Christ in the distressing disguise of the poor, and let that enrich your faith.
All right, that's a powerful note to end on there. Before we close, I want to preview some of the upcoming dialogues and gatherings that we have. On Saturday, October 26th, less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, we're collaborating with the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice to hold a dialogue on faith, discernment, and democracy, young people, and the 2024 election. We'll have Chris Crawford of Protect Democracy, Lauren Relaford from the Children's Defense Fund, and Kate Scanlon from OSV News. A week after the election, on November 12th, we'll have an online dialogue on faith and the faithful in the 2024 election. What happened, why, and what now? We'll hear from Ryan Burge, a leading expert on religion and politics, Tom Reese from Religion News Service, we love you all, and Sabrina Rodriguez from the Washington Post. And we'll continue our analysis after the election with an in-person dialogue on December 10th to explore how key principles of Catholic social thought can offer an affirmative path forward in both a challenged church and a polarized nation. We'll have David Brooks from the New York Times, Kerry Robinson from Catholic Charities USA, Vince Rougeau from the College of the Holy Cross, and Sister Teresa Maya from the Catholic Health Association. So please visit our website for more information about these and other gatherings and to RSVP. We hope those of you in person can join us upstairs for the reception where we can continue the conversation afterwards. This discussion was recorded and we'll post it on our website and social media channels later for you to watch. And there are also follow-up resources on our website if you want to look at those. Thanks to the School of Continuing Studies at Georgetown, all of our vendors, and a special thanks to my colleagues, Kim Daniels, John Carr, Kim Mazik, Anna Gordon, and Kira Farrell, who's back there. Thanks for their help to make this all a success. Thanks to all of you for joining us, both here at the School of Continuing Studies and especially those watching online. And then finally, join me in thanking our wonderful participants here, Aleja Hertzler-McCain, Santiago Ramos, Leah Garcia, and Father Agustino Torres.